Hi, everyone. Good morning. So let's go around and introduce yourselves first and maybe talk about what you do at your respective organizations.
Hello, good morning. Nikesh Desai, co-founder, CEO of Investing Channel. We are a financial marketing platform, so we help a lot of niche digital publications who write about finance and investing monetize their audience. So we take their context, their audience with our data and technology, which we'll get into a little bit more, and really understand the audience segments and their intent for major financial brands.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deepna. I'm the director of data science at Dotdash, which formerly used to be About.com. And many people recognize About.com, and the story still isn't old. We just went through a major rebranding of the company, which is a beautiful story. And I was part of that story because I started right as About.com became Dotdash, and data was very much at the center of this transformation, and it sort of led the transformation. So it was quite an exciting time to lead the data science team during this process, and I would love to discuss more about that.
Andrew Owens, Director of Analytics at Bauer XL Media. We have a portfolio of magazines which we represent in the digital format. And yeah, I think most of my focus is really on data science and kind of operations research within the company.
I'm Marcus Witte, so I work for Source Media. We have 18 different publications. American Banker, which is one of the oldest publications in the United States, is one of our brands, so definitely a legacy brand coming out of print. I run demand generation, integrated marketing, and digital ad strategy for all of the brands. And so data is definitely at play because unlike most of you guys that can actually use programmatic means, we have very small sort of niche audiences that we have to typically monetize through leads, which presents its own challenges.
Thanks. So I guess we can start out by talking about how your companies leverage data and what's the main goal behind the use of that data.
Yeah, for us, well, I'll answer the question in a sec, but I think what has been interesting about our kind of 2-year embarkment on data is how much it's made the entire organization more efficient, from finance to marketing to sales. We all talk about, how do we spend more effectively, drive more margin, drive revenue from data. But interestingly for us, we're about 50 people, and in big part because of data, I don't think I have to hire much next year. So it's made us a lot more efficient in our day-to-day efforts. But the goal for us is really to figure out segments of our audience and the intent of those audience to drive ad revenue. Very simply put, there's a lot behind that. It's about personalizing the content, getting smarter about how to look at newsletter development and creating content from that data. But in the end, it's about ad revenue and defining those segments and a lot of things behind it that support it.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that he said, it's very much the same for Dotdash as well, except you can't help but tell the story from 2 different angles. One angle is pre-Dotdash, so the About.com world, and post-Dotdash, and how that has really changed the way we think about data and our audience. So I'll tell it from both of those angles, and About.com has 20 years of internet data. I mean, we predate Google. So if you take sort of the interest of the world and just map it and how it's changed over the 20 years, it's very exciting data. Except we learned that somehow it just wasn't working. So what about it wasn't working, and what needed to be changed to basically make it more, to resonate well with the current world? So we use data to transform that entire company. We basically went from having all of this content that for 20 years of legacy content that just wasn't working. We got rid of 90% of that and only kept the 10%. And we used data to inform what that 10% would be and why. And then once we had figured that out, all of last year's focus was basically increasing growth and engagement because it had declined. We were pretty much crashing at that point, and we really needed to figure out what is it that the audience wants. So out of that came 6 different brands, and they are now the fastest growing brands within their own categories. And the goal of next year, post-Dash World, once now that our traffic is almost up back to where it used to be and almost exponentially growing at this point. The next goal is to figure out sort of who these audience segments are and how we can leverage that to maximize ad revenue going into 2018. So, yeah.
I think one thing that might be a little different between kind of you guys and what Bauer XL Media has experienced is that we're really pretty much only programmatic driven from our revenue. So we don't really have a large sales staff to support with metrics. So a lot of the kind of data science and analytics focus has been, around purely just content generation, right? What are the tools that I need to put in editors and content creators' hands to actually allow them to make better articles? For instance, if you're thinking of an idea or some topic, right, and you have some keywords, well, there's not just things like SEMrush, which tell you how you might do on Google, but there's actually tools within like Facebook marketing APIs that can actually inform what you're potentially going to write about and how big that audience is. So I think our focus has been, pushing all of this data into the hands of those editors so that they can make informed decisions that ideally grow our audience base. Beyond that, I mean, we've been using data also in more of an operations research function to kind of identify within the company things that can be automated and where we can, put algorithms behind better decision making.
I think we look at it the same way. I mean, we look at data as on the editorial side. The editorial team has to be informed. I think everybody's kind of definitely brought that to light. If you're not getting a great understanding of who your audience is and what the topics that they're consuming, you're just not going to be successful in terms of being able to drive engaged traffic. But we look at it as that kind of two-headed approach, which is then we're taking that data from those users. How many people have heard of account-based marketing? All right. In the B2B world, account-based marketing is all the rage, like annoyingly so. All we do is talk about account-based marketing. And there's good reason for that, but it's really about identifying these key audience segments, and we go from financial services all the way to national mortgage news and HR benefits. So we don't have a ton of traffic. We actually can't even monetize programmatically. We actually take our first-party data, and what we're doing with our first-party data is doing direct matches with other partners like Social Flow. And then we're going out to other groups like Adaptive Intelligence, and we're finding those first-party users off portfolio. But what's great about that is, we're in a position where we can command still $100 plus CPMs, and we're predominantly sold out on most of our publications. So that puts us in this rarefied world of still having these commanding audiences. Our goal, though, is, the problem that we face, and this is where data comes into play, is that we are a mature business. So it's not like there are infinite amounts of C-suite people in banks. It's just a very finite audience. So our challenge is more about how do you get those individuals actually come in and engage with your site so that you can get the data so that you can go out and target them. And so what we're doing around account-based marketing is we take key accounts for clients. We implemented what's called it's a customer data platform. So if you guys saw The Economist yesterday, they use a platform called Lytics. And I would recommend that all publishers look at a customer data platform. It's really, it's a powerful piece of technology that allows you to append all of your users down to a single source ID. So all that great data coming in from the editorial play, we can now actually see what are these individuals consuming. We can use groups and partnerships with Bombora to say what are they doing off portfolio. And then it has direct plugins to all of our marketing channels, so we can push all that data out to all of our marketing channels and target them not only on site but off site, through social, through native. And so at the end of the day, obviously it's about revenue, but that's kind of how we approach it.
So maybe one of you can sort of walk us through how data can really drive ad revenue effectively, and also how, if you think that publishers are using data profiling effectively, and what are some of the challenges of that?
Yeah, in our case, we have a lot of, our audience is reading about financial content, right? What happened in Google's earnings, Facebook, ETFs, et cetera. So the understanding that audience, because there's not a lot of, first-party data of them registering is a important part of our data strategy, and then the intent of those audiences. If someone is going to, a travel site, you have pretty clear intent there, right? But people are just reading about financial information, doesn't tell you what kind of financial products that they're interested in. ETFs, brokers, investment newsletters. So for us, our data strategy has been really about understanding these audiences, from retail investor to a financial professional, even within the financial professional world, much like Source, very niche audiences, advisors, RIAs, broker dealers, et cetera. So we spend a lot of time leveraging what first-party data we have with offline and third-party data sources to really understand who the audience is first and foremost, and then the intent. And that intent is informed by a lot of things. Either it's the kind of clickstream path that they're taking to eventually converting to a product, and then building a profile of that user over time to then more intelligently target them with additional offers. So for us, it's clearly added millions of dollars of incremental revenue by figuring out these audience segments and intent a lot more through the use of data. But we've also leveraged it to drive that ad revenue stream through creating more engagement through content. So by understanding these finite audiences, like a hedge fund manager who manages 5 billion plus, and what they're reading is content in of itself for the rest of the community to hear about. So we've created content from understanding these audiences and their intent that the rest of the investors across our 25 million uniques want to read about. But to answer your other question, which I think was, are publishers leveraging data as best as they could? No, I mean, there's some stat that says 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years, yet 0.5% of it is really being used. I think we're maybe at 2%. So even us, who spent a lot of time and money and effort on this strategy, have a lot to do to take advantage of it.
And why do you think that is? That so little of it is being used? I mean,
there's a lot of reasons. One, just to sort through all the acronyms in this industry, CDP, DMP, what effectively can bring all these data sources together, and then how do you actually make sense of these millions and billions of variables is something that exists in other industries and is coming to ours. So I think it's kind of part technology, right, and part even just mentality. We think of ourselves as publishers, as media companies, not really tech and data companies. So I think that mindset also is part of it, and we're trying to adapt our team toward that.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, part of it's to just the availability of talent, to really parse through gigabytes of data that you're probably going to get every day. You're going to need a data science team of a huge data science team to actually get like 90% of the value out of it. If you find the 5 most valuable percent, that's probably what you're going to stick your time on. But it's really a constraint of folks that are affordable and growing that team.
Also, I mean, one logistic is just that the limitation that we had before was data storage. We just didn't have the power to be able to store all of this data. But that has grown exponentially in the last 10 years, and no one saw this. Well, maybe some people saw it coming, but it was like astrophysicists and scientists who saw this coming. But industry was sort of behind in the sense that we have all of this data, but we're going to eventually need people. Like, we're going to need human learning to actually make sense out of all of this data. So yeah, I think that has grown a lot, and we're just catching up now. So yeah, that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, I mean, our challenge was we had 8 different data platforms, and so we could have thought somebody was 8 different people. because we had print, we had conferences, we had email, we had all of these data platforms. None of them were talking together. And so you can't do anything with that. If you think somebody is 8 different people, you're screwed. And so what happened though is when we implemented the customer data platform, it's really kind of like a veneer that sits on top of all of your data platforms, and it allowed us to get everybody down to a single source ID. So that was for us kind of the aha moment, because now we could see if somebody is actually engaging with an email, going to a conference, if they're a print subscriber, what topics they're consuming on our site. We can then group all those individuals up into like-minded segments. And for us in the ad revenue side, like where we saw the most powerful, and I know this is going to be a shock, but our print revenues were really declining. And so we had to figure out, well, how do we offset those print revenues? And for us, it's all about first-party data. First-party data is a gold mine. And there's a lot of people going out there that will claim account-based marketing, and they're doing things like IP-level targeting. So, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to target all of Citibank's individuals, but that could be the security guard, that could be the CEO. You don't know who that person is in Citibank. For us, we know who that person is. I know that that is the C-suite. I know that that is the vice president. I know that that's the IT tech manager. So, I mean, B2B has a little bit of difference, in terms of the consumer world. I actually worked at About.com for a number of years. We never knew who our users were on About.com. We had the Blue Kais of the world and everything else, but we actually didn't know who they were. Here, we know who these people are. And so for us, to be able to drive ad revenue, we are commanding $40 plus CPMs on exchanges because we're packaging up our first-party data and we're selling it out into the exchanges. So for us, that's really where it's not just about like, how do we monetize on portfolio? We also took the approach of, well, let's open up our walls and figure out how do we take that first-party data, which is incredibly valuable with some of the most powerful audiences in the world, and actually say there is value here. You are not going to get a crappy $4 CPM on our site, and you are not going to get a crappy $4 CPM off-site. These are first-party users that we're grouping up, and we're going to monetize them efficiently.
If you don't mind, I would just like to comment on that. Yeah, so at About.com, we sort of share the philosophy that it sort of doesn't matter who you are as a person. Like, I don't know if you're Jim Smith and you look at X, Y, and Z throughout the day. Our philosophy is really that you are truly a different person every time you come to the internet to find answers. Like, one example is, like, let's say there's a CEO. If he or she suffers from insomnia at 3 a.m. when they're trying to, find an answer to the particular question that they have, they're Googling it, and a lot of our audience is coming through organic searches. So we don't care if this person is a CEO, Jim Smith, goes to Citibank X number of times per day. We actually target them in that moment within the intent that they're coming to the site. So our audience segments, yeah, we do have some user-level information, like we do have their demographic information through Google Analytics, but we sort of target or base all of our audience segments based on the intent and the content that they're interested in. And it's been working quite well, actually. So yeah, 90% of our data that we use for creating these segments is for ad revenue and things like that. It's basically based on first-party data, which is ours.
So going on that, I'm wondering what you're thinking about, third-party data, because there have been a lot of studies recently that have shown that marketers who do use all of this data don't actually, trust where it's coming from, don't know if it actually helps, with audience targeting. And so I'm wondering what your opinion is on the issue of transparency when it comes to that.
I mean, I think generally in the industry, nobody really has a great idea. I mean, even Facebook has made kind of multiple oops PR releases saying that, oh, they didn't actually target the correct audiences, or they were reporting incorrectly. It's like, I know some of the people who work at Facebook, they're still people, right? They're still trying to make the best guesses based on what you put in your profile. Just because you say you're a woman and you were born in this year doesn't mean you actually are. So if they're going to market and saying that this is real data, right, that might not actually be the case. You can make fake profiles, you can change your name, they only have what information you give to them. So I think the ultimate answer is not everyone has the robust data that they need to make decisions. Even if you look at things like Google Analytics, they're only really going to be able to give you maybe demographic information on 50 to 75% of your audience. And that's not including teenagers who they won't track, right? That's adults who are using a device and they've gone and done, or they've gone and clicked on things somewhere else on the internet. So that, that data is not really transparent in really any markets. So I think people should be pretty skeptical about it. But ultimately, you have to go and sell some ads, right? So you have to make adjustments based on that. I probably wouldn't put in any sales pitch that we absolutely will give you all of these like men 18 years old interested in X audience, right? That's actually going to be a really challenging claim to meet when you actually run your ad campaign.
Yeah, but I agree, because I think the intent side of it, right, is like that's another key, right? So if you're like, that's what I loved when I worked at About.com, was if we had these small little sites and you can pick out intent. If you're coming into a type 2 diabetes article, it's probably because you're looking for information, you're a caregiver, you have type 2 diabetes, that kind of thing. We look at third-party data, though, to append first-party data. And I think that's, I think a lot of people can get trapped into just go out and buy third-party data. We're going to use that to target. And I actually think we're doing a disservice even to our advertisers by doing that. So I always say, and the way that we approach it is to append first party to third party. So we do go out and we get, like I said, we work with the Bombars of the world. We go out to Discovery Database, which is the definitive kind of financial services database to append and hygiene all of our data. We're looking at everything from, yes, we have SEMrush and everything else as well to kind of identify what these topics are. But for us, it's really about hygiening and appending to our first party data. So that we still have an understanding and a deep understanding of who that user is and what they're interested in. But we also want to validate everything that's coming in. I mean, if you think about it, if our editors are writing 40 stories about ETFs, our intent scores on ETFs are going to be through the roof. And the question becomes, well, is that because we're just writing a bunch of articles about ETFs? Or, are they actually displaying intent? So what we do is we go out, again, beyond our walls, and we're using that third-party data to look at, okay, well, these users, are they actually demonstrating ETF behavior off portfolio as well? And if they are, then we know we've got a great intent signal that we can then go out and target. And so, and I agree, I mean, I think it's all about intent, frankly. If you can identify that intent and you can target against that intent, you're putting yourself, you're putting your advertiser in a much better position.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more point to that. So we are in the world of data, right? Like there's so many companies popping up every day trying to sell data to us. And because we're becoming more and more data hungry, trying to figure out the behavior of every single person, we're sort of open to taking those data sources and add to our database and keep growing and just trying to make sense out of the data. But I do think that as publishers, we do have the responsibility to sort of question the data transparency, right? Like there are new companies that promise a lot of really high quality data and they sort of aggregate their data from other party sources. But we do have to question, where's the data coming from? And a lot of people do challenge this notion by saying, oh, it's a proprietary process and it's X, Y, and Z apps that are on your mobile devices that we can't give you the names of and things like that. And I do really believe that we need to question that notion and really question where's the data coming from. Is it a biased sample? Is it a representative sample? How many times does it change per day or per month? Because audience changes, right? Depending on the time of the day, depending on the time of the month. And so these are all kinds of questions that we should be asking before we sort of create this mishmash of data pools and data lakes. So I did want to add that.
For us, similar to Marcus, although we're not as fortunate to have a lot of that rich user-given data, but we leverage third-party data only to the extent to grow the seed that we have. So, if we have a high intent of these advisors, just to take his example, who are reading ETFs, but need to fulfill on a 50K budget, yet only have 10K of that audience, we then layer that third-party data to create lookalikes effectively. Because I do agree, there is a lot of questionable third-party data, and to sell something standalone on that data, we just stay away from, because you're also just doing the advertiser a disservice. They can do that themselves. So we really take that seed first-party data, whether it's intent or an audience segment, to then open up a pool leveraging third-party data if we need to fulfill beyond a bigger budget.
Yeah, so when you're competing with platforms like Facebook and Google, what do you tell advertisers and marketers about your data that makes it unique?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty niche audience, right? There are investors on Facebook, but they're not really engaging, there like they are on other sites that we manage. So for us, again, going back to that intent, you don't have that understanding or intent on Facebook. So what we try to pitch effectively is that we've got a much more loyal, engaged audience who are churning X times per minute on our site, all that other good stuff, but really, at the end of the funnel, depending on where they are in their marketing approach, really letting them know that we have signals that a Facebook wouldn't have. At the same time, we'll leverage Facebook, right? I mean, we'll push this data into social platforms to find those audiences for them as well.
Yeah, I agree with the intent part. For example, if someone has the flu, they will most likely come to a site looking for an answer of how long does it take for the flu to go away, or what are the symptoms of it, right? They're not going to Facebook for these kinds of questions. So intent is really key, and that's what we really try to sell. Also, another piece that gives us some advantage is that yes, the world has changed a lot from what it used to be. The internet has changed a lot from what it used to be 20 years ago. But there are some trends in history that repeat themselves, like health is all, like people's concerns around health are always going to decline during the holiday season. It's going to be a huge drop, and we see like 40% drop almost in traffic when it comes to health. Guess what happens on January 1st? People are all about health, and people are all about being proactive and starting the year with the right foot. And traffic increases on all of the health-related content that's related to weight loss and things like that, and actually stays up for 4 months. So these are sort of the kinds of things that we were able to predict that are we really, I don't know if you've seen some of our data stories at some of the conferences, but we really like to show this plot of like how the internet has changed over the last 20 years, and the peaks and valleys are almost like there are some things that are very, very predictive, spot on, year over year. So there are those things, and Facebook and Google, yes, they've been around and they know those things, but yeah, there's an advantage in coming to our content that Facebook and Google don't have. So yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to Deepna's point there. I actually worked at About for a little while as a data scientist, and
lots of About people.
Yeah, we're all abouters here. And there was actually a period, kind of before a holiday, and we were looking at the traffic and just like day-over-day changes, and we saw this huge spike before Memorial Day for like grill recipes, and then it was everything around like outdoor activities, and then all of the health-related things, which were very depressing, around like poison ivy and like signs of a stroke or signs of a heart attack, because you all just went out and had that grilled, pork or something. So I think there are definitely like clear patterns like that, but ultimately what you bring to market can be, I think, dependent on the publisher you're working at. So for Bauer, just because we are so programmatic driven, our real focus is what do the exchanges actually want. Again, we're not servicing a sales team, and we're not servicing, potentially like some Procter or Gamble or some client that might come in the door. So, we'll go and talk to Rubicon, like what are their algorithms actually doing? What are they actually saying about click-through rate or viewability? What audiences do they really want on their side? You might talk down to an exchange and find out, oh, hey, they really want Android users from, some part of the country. Or some part of the world. So I would actually encourage you to actually go have those discussions if you do have a programmatic side to your company. Start talking to the exchanges and understand what their customers want, because they will probably have a better idea of it than what you end up getting on your site.
Yeah, I mean, we pivot from, we try to pivot the conversation from, obviously having a social play is definitely important. For us, again, it's about reaching out into the social space with that first party. I'm always of the opinion that as advertisers, they need to try multiple things. If they're looking for a mass reach against cheap CPM so that they can drive a, tremendous volume of leads, then there's no harm in that. What we really say is like, we're cutting through the clutter. Because we're in the B2B space, so everybody wants leads. And if we're not able to provide really highly qualified leads, then we're out of business. So that's why we come and we just say, hey, it's the first party data, and with all of these intent signals and all of these different behaviors, we'll even use Social Flow, and they've been a great partner for us because we've literally been able to do first party matches against our users and say, that's great, you guys need a social strategy, you need a LinkedIn strategy. Everybody has a LinkedIn strategy. Well, that's fantastic, but we can actually group our individual users up that are demonstrating intent behaviors, and we can go target them out in the social space. So that's how we kind of pivot the conversation. So, we're all about, you should have many facets to your media plan. We often develop many facets to our media plans. But again, if it comes down to first-party data and cutting through the clutter, for us, it's really, if you think about it, if you turn over 1,000 leads to somebody's sales team, they get overwhelmed. And then ultimately what happens is their sales team starts calling all of these different leads. They get 25 in and they're like, these leads are crap. Like, nobody's answering my call. Nobody's returning my call, right? Well, that's because you got 1,000 people. Just because they consumed one piece of content does not mean they are in market. So what we try to do is really through account-based marketing and through that first-party data is to kind of cut through the clutter and say, here are the individuals that have these install bases that are demonstrating these behaviors, and as we sort of drive engagement and are able to score all of that, we're coming up with these digital dashboards which actually show all of the behavior of the users. So how many pieces of content did they consume? Did they click on an ad? Did they go back to your site? What types of topics are they consuming on our site? If we're able to show that, right, and then suddenly we're like, here's 30 individuals that we're going to turn over to your sales organization instead of 1,000, they loved that. Because what they're able to then go back to their sales team and say is, hey guys, these are the ones that you really need to focus on right now because they are in market and they're showing these levels of intent. So, I think in the social space, it's kind of like, it's a different mindset out there. You're looking at cat photos and things like that, and you're not necessarily in that mindset of, hey, I'm going to go, research ETFs right now. So for us, it's about cutting through the clutter and getting through that noise, but using those platforms to help us, to, reach out to those individuals.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, go ahead,
okay.
And then we'll go to Q&A.
Okay, great. So I was just wondering, we've talked about there's so much data, and so internally, how do you go about, organizing, centralizing, and sharing that data within your organization to help, make these editorial choices or, how to target those audiences?
For us, as the co-founder CEO, I had people beating the drum about data a few years ago, and I didn't really listen to them for a while. So I think the first thing is getting not just the buy-in from management, but the proper investment. It's not just one person in the data room. So you've got to have the right concepts, right technology, right people, right investment, but really understand what your use cases are, and then kind of define what you're talking about. And once you get through that, which is a lot, you've got to centralize your data in some lake, right, that is, queryable and not in 5 different systems. And then you've got to visualize it, right? Understand what are the trends and applications of what that use case can be. And so there are DMPs and CDPs that help that. There's, Domo and Looker and others that can help visualize that. So there's a lot of, costly, but I think very valuable technologies that we have employed to, once you get past that buy-in and proper investment into this data strategy, that you need really to kind of effectively, to Marcus's point about a CDP, really you need to centralize everything first and foremost, and then A/B test. Don't give up, right? I mean, there's so much data to work through that, it's about kind of keeping on the path of what that initial use case is till you get it right.
Yeah, at Dotdash we have about 250 to 300 employees now, and about 10% of those, like 20 to 30 employees, are strictly technical data people. They're data scientists, they're data engineers, they're data analysts. And for a company that's 250 or 300 people, that's a very large data science team. So we take data science very seriously, and so all of the points that you mentioned, it's quite sophisticated. We have a separate data platforms team, we have a separate data engineering team, excuse me, we have a separate SEO engineering team that sort of work to do their own pieces. So the data platform team takes all of the data that's incoming, ingesting all of the data, creating a data lake that's managed on a regular basis, so that the data scientist's job is to just take that, filter out the data that they're interested in out of the big pool, and analyze it. And then we've actually also made a great effort in the past year to create internal tools or products that the product managers can use. So those are sort of like the very easy to use UIs, very simple, nothing fancy, but they don't have to write the SQL queries. They don't have to code in Python to get those insights out. And we've made a great point to actually go out and train these users who want to derive these insights so they can be independent and do them on their own. So yeah, I think the key here is to not only just have one focused team that does it, but sort of educate across the organization how to derive these insights and how to use them to guide their own individual decision making. So yeah, that's how we do it there.
Yeah, and I think somebody was actually bringing up to me the way things used to be done at my company, and how they used to get content out of. This was prior to my being there, but basically we used to, when we first started, we were very new to digital. Bauer Media has been around for a very long time, but there really wasn't a good, digital front in the US. And the edit teams used to take magazines and go page by page and copy those things into a digital CMS. I'd say in the last 6 months, we've used things like basically new ways of thinking about what is data. We know that is like content, right? But what could we do with that content that's sitting in some magazine? And we actually use some computer vision APIs and some kind of like new off-the-shelf open source tools from Google to actually help us really understand what that content's about, whether we want to bring it into our digital portfolio, and then ideally, like, okay, what can we link this to? Maybe for affiliate linking, or what other articles within our content really match well with this. And I think part of my approach really at our company is, because we're so programmatic driven, there's only so much we can do on like the product side to actually drive better rates from these exchanges. So what can we do internally to change our operations? How can we identify something that's pretty repetitive, right? If you have an editor going through 12 pieces of content, copying it into a CMS every day, that's a computer problem now, right? That's something that can be solved with technology. So we started thinking about, okay, that's a data workflow, essentially. And then we've looked into other parts of our operation around like programmatic arbitrage, right, where we're buying users from Facebook or through Outbrain, Taboola, what have you, through our sites, and what returns we're making. That's basically stock trading. So I've sat down with that team and said, okay, what decisions are you guys making every day? You guys are spending a lot of money on this process, and what are the potential mistakes they could be making that could actually cost the business, right? So I think making sure that you're actually surfacing like your data science folks into operations, and actually, if you have a problem and you're like, oh man, we just made a mistake in our arbitrage, or we just made a mistake the way we published something, that might actually be a data science problem that your data science team can solve. So I think ultimately at this point, like, data's everywhere. It's not just something that lives in your Google Analytics dashboard and your line charts. It's something that can be broken down into, should I make this decision? Yes, no, maybe. So I think that's something we've really tried to push into almost every operations workflow at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we're a smaller company. I mean, one thing that I always, I actually miss about, Dotdash and About was their investment in technology. And the honest truth is you have to invest. And you have to make the decision to invest in that data because it will pay dividends and it will pay returns. So, even as we look at it from kind of an internal perspective, we do have a data science team, and you need a data science team. It's not even a question. If you even want to, manage, manipulate, analyze, look at your data, you need a data science team. And so, we at Source Media, we actually have a data science team. It's much smaller. So they have to be a little bit more nimble. And what I would say is we also use technology and technology platforms to help supplement, in place of the people. So for us, it's really about, and we're not even, perfect at it by any stretch right now, because if you look at what the editorial staff is doing, they're tapping into, it's a little bit siloed, even for like kind of our taste. And it's getting a lot better because we implemented Domo, and through Domo now we're able to create these digital dashboards, which have actually gone a long way in being able to like really get people the access that they need to the data. But from our perspective right now, it's really about, okay, well, we've got, some of these other, like the customer data platforms, we've got the Domo visualizations, and all of that activity is being tracked and used. And what we're really trying to do right now is actually come together, even looking at things like sponsorship opportunities around the data, that, kind of look at across the board. So how do we, because for us, it's all about integrated marketing. So how do we take that data? How do we actually visualize it to the editorial staff to help drive topics that we're then going to pull into sponsorship opportunities, which will then translate into an event? And that's really where we're taking it. So, but yeah, I think it's all about investing. If you don't invest in it, you're not going to get anywhere.
We have a question over here.
Actually, what you just said was a great segue to my question. But for everybody, hi, I'm Leandro from Sint. And my question is, yeah, everybody needs to invest in data science, and we have our own data sets and other third-party data sets. How are you thinking, or what criteria are you using to define the boundaries of how much you want to invest in data science, up to where, and when do you get an external source? Like, how are you thinking about those boundaries?
I think anyone staffing wants more people under them, because I think what we see is that once you kind of, it's like if you give a mouse a cookie, right? If I give somebody a great way to transform their operations flow, I'm going to get the other 10 business managers asking me, some question, or like, oh wow, I want to do this even more complex process. Ultimately, I always advocate for more people on my team because I'm managing them, right? I'm biased. But you do have to, I think it's tricky because, especially with some of the salaries that are, kind of happening with the like talent wars between like Google and Facebook. I mean, I lost a data engineering candidate for probably a ton of money to Facebook a couple weeks ago. And I think you need to be pretty conservative and have like realistic expectations about what you can staff for, and then also what's achievable once you staff. So I think, the sole focus should really be on like getting the data science team to automate as much as they can. And that will just like add more and more and more value as they improve operations. I wouldn't say there's like a clear P&L like, oh, we need more data scientists now based on this number. But I think it's ultimately like what kind of demand can you generate within your own company for data folks, and making sure that they actually are generating demand for their own products internally.
Yeah, as I kind of mentioned earlier, we try to define the use case as much as possible, and it's either revenue or efficiency, right? So depending on where it kind of nets out there, I then attach it to asset value, right? Am I going to really build this? Is it going to really add a lot more to my business, or do I just go buy the system? So it depends on, is it a margin help? Is it a revenue help? And then, being a limited staff, am I going to invest in building this technology, for example, versus partnering with it? And for us, we need to, more often than not, we partner with best of breed technology. For the most part, we need to keep extracting as much of that first party data and building on that first party data and understanding that intent so that we sell more leads, or so that's where we got to put our investment. and thinking and data scientists around. And so I would say we're, quite honestly, a little technology light from a build point of view. At the same time, you know, these technologies aren't cheap, so your use cases have to be, significant. And so we're not I don't think we'll ever 100% be there, but as long as I'm 70, 80% there, then it works.
We look at it as a percentage of revenue, frankly. I mean, we look at it as the growth, against data-driven product versus, what we're seeing in declines in other areas. So if we can demonstrate that we've got, exponential growth in terms of, account-based marketing and some of these data-driven products, we take a percentage of that overall, and then we'll apply that to a head count. So, and I think that formula works well, just because it's one, it's showing you kind of the volume, and the volume of the data is actually driving. And so, and for us, it's really about, we look at it as a data science person is basically worth about, 10x the revenue, whatever that salary is. So if we can drive 10x of that revenue, then we'll apply it to that data science. Now, obviously, we're never going to have like the size that Dotdash has or anything like that, just because we're a smaller B2B site. So there will be a cap at some point. But once that cap hits, frankly, we'll have plenty of data, in-house. The reporting will be, much more seamless, and we're not, frankly, worried about it. We just haven't figured out what that cap is yet. But we have a very small data science team right now, and yeah, I mean, one of the things is we're looking at that revenue percentage, and then we're justifying that with our board to say, okay, based off of X, we need to staff this person up. I think it works really well.
Yeah, just one last thing that I would add to that is that I really believe that it's a known fact. Humans innovate, machines automate. So if the use case really is to innovate and making sense out of the data and figure out a process, what is the best way to predict what I'm trying to do, then that's where data scientists come in. You're not going to be able to replace that. But if the use case is, for example, Looker, like you're just trying to provide the team with something that it's an ongoing thing that they just need to be able to visualize and make sense out of, there's no reason to hire a very expensive data scientist to just do something like that. So I think there are lots of really good products that are out there that can sort of replace the need for having a large data science team. So if in that case, it actually just makes sense to pay the monthly fee and do it as a one-off thing. Because yes, we all know data scientists don't come in cheap. So yeah, totally agree with everybody here.
Oh, and time management too, that's the other thing. We looked at the hours that our client managers were spending in terms of doing some of these reporting, back to the client, and it was ridiculous how much time was being spent on reporting, where we can bring in, a brilliant data science into the organization, and suddenly they can just figure out quickly, like, okay, I can do this, I can do that, I can implement that, and bam. So it's also about time management and just being able to really kind of make your own teams more efficient too.
Guys, we're going to continue this in the roundtable at the end of the morning. Sarah, panel, thanks very much.